Right, watching people come in. Welcome everybody to our very third American Craft Forum. We're just going to give it a couple minutes for everybody to come into the meeting. As everybody is flooding in. It's a high volume call, so it just takes a few moments for us to get everybody in. As you're coming in, those of you whose cameras are on, you will be turned off, just FYI. So we'll just give it a couple more minutes for that to get set. Hello, it's nice to see some faces, but we will be turning your cameras off. Okay, all right. Welcome everybody to the third edition of the American Craft Council's Craft Forum. We're very excited today to be addressing the education disruptions and opportunities theme. My name is Gwen Ruckenbrod-Smith, and I am the Executive Director of SNAG, and I am today's forum moderator. So I'm very excited to be here for the third edition of this forum. Today, our series on innovation in the field of adversity continues by turning the impacts of COVID-19 that has had on the education field. From residencies to education centers to higher education, the way we learn, teach, and educate has been turned on its head. We close our first round of the American Craft Forum by hearing from the education field, students and educators, as well as administrators about new directions the field is turning to and what we've learned from this most recent disruption. So today we will be focusing on education. Somebody needs to be admitted into the room. So I want to put that person in. All right, so a couple things that I wanted to let you all know about, kind of the house rules and how this works. There's a couple different things about Zoom, and we've just learned that the way that we've set this up works best. For those of you who are new to Zoom and have never used the chat option below, basically the way that you access that is you move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, and there is in the middle of the navigation bar is the chat. Many of you have already gone ahead and said hello. Feel free to introduce yourself and where you're from. It's wonderful for us to all know who's on today's call. When you do that, please make sure that the that little blue bubble actually is marked everyone so that we can all see the questions as well as see who's here on the call and where you're from. Some other things, and you will use the chat to type your questions if you have any questions for any of the presenters today. We also ask that you mute your audio and you also keep your video camera off. Only video cameras that will be on will be the hosts as well as the presenters. And last but not least, there's a couple different ways for you to view today's presentation. In the upper right-hand corner of the Zoom box, you can either hit speaker view or gallery view. And gallery view gives you all the speakers together at once. So myself as moderator and any speakers. So you can see it's kind of more that Brady Bunch look. So you can go back and forth and decide which view works best for you. The other thing that you can do is if you are seeing non-video participants when you are in gallery view, you can go to the top right-hand corner of any one of those black boxes that have somebody's name in it. There's 3 dots. If you hit the 3 dots and come down and click on hide non-video participants, everybody else will get hidden and you'll only see the screens of the presenters. So just to give you some clarity on how to best view today's presentation. Also, I would like to introduce Jason Samuels, who's our amazing tech guru, and he's the behind the scenes person to make sure all of this works right. And Lauren Baker is our savvy online chat moderator and also our remote researcher in residence because she was supposed to come to ACC, but because of COVID-19 has been stuck in the UK. So hi, Lauren. Thanks for helping out again today. You're on mute. Do you want me to and then Jason, did I forget anything?
No, Gwen, you're brilliant and got it all as usual.
Thank you. I appreciate the help that the 2 of them do behind the scenes, and I think it's important. We always welcome and acknowledge and appreciate those people who do all the behind the scenes stuff. All right, so I'd like to get started by introducing Sarah Schultz, who's the Executive Director of ACC and, of course, the main impetus behind these wonderful forums. Welcome, Sarah. Would you like to
Thank
say
you.
a few words?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gwen, and thanks to everybody for coming today. This is the third in a series of what will not be the last series we do. I think of convening people and really all navigating our way collectively through the new terrain that we find ourselves in. I just want to say how great it's been to be able to partner with colleagues like Gwen, like SNAG, Surf Plus, Springboard for the Arts, and to have just an incredible roster of speakers and participants from a whole range of the craft field. So with that, I just also want to say that I'm personally very excited about today's conversation. I come actually from the education field, and I know that you know, education is the lifeblood of our work and our practice, whether it's our livelihood, it's the community it creates, it's the knowledge that it creates, it's the skills that we share. And I know, you know, I know there's a lot of concern about the way it's both been disrupted, but I'm also very excited to think about the ways in which education can disrupt as well. And I'm going to post something on the side. I had a chance about a month and a half ago to do an interview with a designer, craftsperson, Yvonne Moser in San Francisco. And we spent a lot of time talking about, is there a thing like craft thinking in the way there's design thinking? And I think that as artists, as makers, as people who are so invested in material and process, that we all have so much to really offer beyond the things that we make, but it's the ways that we make it and the ways that we teach. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Thank you all. I will turn it back to you, Gwen.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. We appreciate the wonderful warm welcome. And thank you again to ACC for being willing to host these conversations that they've been so amazing to participate in. I'd also like to introduce another supporter and sponsor of these conversations, and it is the Executive Director of Surf Plus, Cornelia Carey. Cornelia, would you like to come in and say a few words of welcome?
Happy to. Hi, everybody. So right now, I should have been in St. Paul, sitting with my entire board at Springboard's totally cool new digs at a board meeting. And then soon we would be wrapping up and heading over to the ACC St. Paul show. So clearly I did not see this coming. We just had our first virtual board meeting about an hour ago, and it was nice to see everybody's faces, but I certainly love the physicality of being with people. So I'm delighted to join you all once again another week, and to see so many familiar names that are participating today in the audience. And a big thanks to the ACC and my colleagues at SNAG and Springboard for working on these three webinars. SURF is a national artist service organization for readiness, response, and recovery. And I actually like to think of it, the fourth as transformation. And so certainly this topic of education is so important to all of us. And so speaking of which, as I blab away in this introduction, Carrie Cleveland in the chat space is putting up a very quick survey monkey for all the artists on this call, asking you what kinds of technical assistance and information resources you feel like you could use at this point in time. So I hope everybody will look at that, and we'll pass it around again, because I think all of us, SNAG, ACC, SURF, Springboard, would benefit from getting that information about what you need most now. So thanks a lot, and I look forward to this conversation.
That's great. Thanks, Cornelia, and thanks for everything that SURF does for us and to serve the field. We really appreciate it. It's very important. All right, last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Laura Zabel, who's the Executive Director of our last sponsor organization, Springboard for the Arts. Welcome, Laura. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Hello,
Good.
everybody. Welcome. I'm super happy to be here with all of you again for the third week in a row, and really looking forward to this conversation. Springboard's a community and economic development organization based in both rural and urban Minnesota. We work across the country also. One of the things that I was thinking about as I was just reflecting a little bit on the intersections of artist lives and education in all of its incarnations is that we've been running an emergency relief fund always, but most intensely for the last month. And as I read those applications and requests for funding, I'm really struck by how much it points out the kind of structural challenges and the ways that artists are woven into all of these other domains. So we're just seeing so many artists who teach in schools, who work, who do education programs in elder care facilities, who work at museums, who do residencies. And of course, that represents a huge economic loss in this moment, but I also think it points out a real structural challenge that by structuring all of those really vital and important roles and all of the ways that artists provide education in our communities, so many of them are structured as contractors and freelancers, and those are both sometimes the first things to be cut. And as a mom of a 14-year-old, I'm also really aware that those are then people who are not retained when we're in a distance learning environment. So a lot of my kiddos' opportunities for intersecting with artists are gone right now because those aren't salaried teachers at her school who are, doing the Herculean work to move everything online. And so I think it's just yet another way of many, that this crisis has pointed out some of the structural challenges we have in the way that we support artists and the way that artists are involved in supporting our community. And of course, we all have lots and lots of really inspiring examples of the ways that artists have stepped up and provided experiences for young people, and arts organizations as well in this moment. We've certainly benefited from those too. So that's sort of where my head is as we enter this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from all the panelists and watching the chat to hear from all of you, and just really grateful to have this space, and thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks, Laura, so much. And we really appreciate everything that Springboard does to support the artists. It's wonderful. So thank you. Couple reminders before we get started with the first presentation. We will be sending out, our ACC will be sending out a survey after this call. Please take the time to fill it out. It really allows us to better understand your needs so that we can create more supportive conversations moving forward, as Sarah mentioned in her welcome. So I'll remind you at the end to also please take time to fill out that survey. It just means a lot to us so that we know what you would like as subjects for future conversations. Also, just a last reminder that we ask that you keep your audio and your video off. And if you do have questions at any point in time, you can put them in the chat, and we will have a moderated Q&A after each presentation and a little one at the end if there's some additional conversations or questions for the whole group. So feel free to put them in the chat. If those of you don't know how to navigate Zoom, you can find the chat button at the bottom in the middle of the black screen. If you move your cursor down there, it should pop up. You can click that little chat button and the chat should come up. The main thing we ask is that you make sure that your question goes to everyone. You can privately message people, but if you make sure you click that little blue circle, that the down arrow that says everyone, then myself as well as the presenters, we all will be able to see that question. So we appreciate that. All right, so the first questions that we're gonna have with our first presenter is questions around what just happened, what vulnerabilities have we exposed, and what solutions, including baking cookies at home, do we need to figure out as educational stewards? So I would like to introduce our very first presenter, Paul Sakaridis. He is the director of Haystack. Paul, get you to come in. Paul, I think you have to start your own camera. There you are. Great. Hi, Paul. How are you doing today?
All right. Thank you.
Good.
Nice.
Thank you for being here. So tell me a little bit about what you've been experiencing. Obviously, as Haystack being kind of an alternative craft school, you all have had some quick decisions that you had to make, and we'd love to hear your story.
Sure. Thanks for asking to hear it. I also have to say that I was supposed to be at that SURF board meeting today as well, being a board member at SURF. And so there's so many ways in which what we thought we were going to be doing is not what we're doing right now. And, you know, I've been thinking about this every day, as all of us have. And when I was asked to participate in this, the question was almost daunting. Like, what are you doing to take care of yourself? What are you doing to take care of your community? What are you doing to take care of your organization? And I think part of what we're doing is we're just trying to get through each day and to be receptive to the unexpected challenges and opportunities that arise. And we've learned all this new language, right? Like we're all sheltering in place, we're all practicing distancing. We're all pivoting on grants, and there's all this like new lingo that we've incorporated. And I think one of my biggest concerns right now is that we've gone from like not knowing what's happening to suddenly like having all this language to talk about the thing that we're doing now. And I have to say that in many ways, the answer to what happened is I don't really know what just happened, right? All I know is that we've had to respond to a series of really big questions, and we've had to do it in real time. And we've had to address things as an organization that have been unprecedented for us. And there really isn't any training, right? It's not like you go to executive director school, which I didn't, or you go to like an MBA program, or you take a professional practices class and there's a chapter on the pandemic in your organization, right? Like we weren't trained for this. We didn't know this was coming. And perhaps the biggest lesson is we better know that this is coming and we better be prepared for this in the future, because I don't believe this is the last time we're going to find ourselves in this situation. And I don't say that pessimistically. I actually, in some curious way, feel optimistic about it. I think that many of us are going to come out of it as much smarter, stronger organizations, and we're going to find that we're talking to each other in new ways. In terms of what's happened at Haystack, what's happened here is what's happening or has happened or is about to happen at the majority of organizations in the not-for-profit sector of running summer programs, which is that we have decided to suspend all programming for the entirety of our 2020 season. And so for those of you who work in this sector or participate in it, the bottom line of what that means is that we will have absolutely no earned income for the entire season. We will have no earned income. And if you think about budgets, it's dire. That's a very serious consequence. And it's one that we were able to weather. And I want to talk a little bit about how we did that, because that's the part of taking care of our organization. When we backed up and looked at what was coming, our first move was in the early stages in, I guess it was in March, when we realized this is really happening. We made a decision to suspend programs for the very beginning of our season until May 18th. And we thought at that point, maybe it would be okay and we could open things up for the bulk of our summer season and into the fall. Haystack runs May through October. It takes 5 weeks to open our campus and to make it habitable and operational. And so we can't just decide tomorrow to go out there. We have to be prepared. And so we made the decision to suspend through May 18th. And within a week of that announcement, the world had changed again. And then it seemed like every day the world was changing at a rapid pace as we were watching the news and we were watching CDC and we were listening to local and state recommendations on what was happening and how a public health crisis was impacting us at a local, national, and international level. And the next step for me is what was really important, which is that we decided to form a focus group, and I formed it. And the focus group was made up of half staff members and half board members. And so this was not a board-led decision, and this was not a staff-led decision. This is a decision that was made collectively. And I think that this period of time has really exposed and shown us what can happen when there's good leadership and what can happen when there's bad leadership. And regardless of politics, there's ways in which both can play out. And I feel very proud of the leadership that was brought forward by my staff and by my board, and the way that we worked together to ask the real.
Oh, it looks like Paul may have frozen.
I think he is frozen.
I wonder if we turn off his video, we get his audio. Sometimes it helps. So let's try that.
I just did that.
Paul, are you still there? That's also one of the challenges of working so far out in the middle of nowhere.
We may want to move on and then see if we can get Paul back a little bit later.
Okay, absolutely. All right. Okay, well, this is what we're all experiencing, right? Zoom and Wi-Fi connections can always sometimes be challenging. So we'll go ahead and we'll move forward, and then we'll hopefully be able to bring Paul back. It's just kind of, we're all learning how to make this work on our own, right? So the second set of questions that I really wanted to talk about or to think about is really about how our education systems, particularly higher education, how they innovated and changed, and how are they planning to move forward. And they've moved from in-person teaching in the classroom to online or remote teaching is what I kind of prefer to call it, because it's not truly online learning, because we're doing something a little bit different. But our second guest to talk to us a little bit about the experience that she has had is Leslie Boyd. Leslie is both a founding member of the JV Collective and creator of Making Progress, Resources for Social Justice and Craft, as well as the assistant professor of art at Metropolitan State University in Denver. Hi, Leslie, welcome. It's nice to see you.
So good to see you, Gwen, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. Since we do have a brief time, I'm just gonna kind of jump right into things. And I have a few kind of precursors to how I'm gonna frame the thoughts that I'm putting forward. And then I'm hopeful that we can have some pretty robust, ultimately kind of dialogue afterwards for a few minutes. So I want to specifically kind of speak to the gaps in equity and access that have appeared as a result of COVID-19, forcing us into remote learning environments. And how do we use this ultimately as an opportunity that we might learn from? So I am using this as an opportunity, and I want to say that I'm really privileged in being able to do this, and we might not all be able to do this, both physically, mentally, emotionally, but I'm trying to use this as best as possible, and it goes from day to day, as an opportunity to see what we perhaps have taken for granted in higher ed, and how we, in the exposure of these kind of cracks in equity and access, how we might address those issues as we move forward. These are the only, simply my observations, and they're fresh. They certainly change every day. I don't necessarily know that I'm going to be making any endorsements here for any of these, but they're things that are just in my mind that I'm taking note of to kind of digest and think about as I move forward in my teaching. To speak a little bit about my institution just for a moment, because I think it might contextualize kind of some of the issues that I'm dealing with. So I teach at Metropolitan State University of Denver. It's a public open enrollment university. It is a commuter campus in downtown Denver. In regard to our student body, we have 46% students of color, 56% of our students are first generation, and 80% of our students work full or part-time. Our average undergraduate age, I believe, is 26. So we certainly have a much more kind of working class, diverse student body overall. We are a NASA accredited program, and we are an interdisciplinary studio arts program. So I specifically run the jewelry area, but I work within a larger interdisciplinary studio arts program again. I want to kind of acknowledge that we are all educators that are in this mix, whether it's in higher ed. I've become so connected with educators that are in primary education through this, which has been really amazing to be able to connect with people at other kind of levels. Or if we're working at craft institutions, right? We're all looking at our materials and the communication that we're giving forward to our students, and hopefully we're making sure that that's accessible. So we've had to, for instance, tailor much of the projects that we might be introducing with our students to make sure that we're acknowledging that they don't have access to not just the studio space, but even to the funds potentially to build out that studio space at home, or even to purchase simple materials. And again, this is something that I hope many of us are already doing, but I want to make sure that we're taking kind of note of these things that we're doing. Because although this instance of the switch to remote learning is certainly exposing a lot of these equity cracks, these are things that existed beforehand. And these will things that will exist as we move forward. The fact that one of our students might not have access to internet at home now has been an issue before now. It's just become more glaring of an issue at this point. So I think, again, that we are provided, unfortunately, with this opportunity, though, to really reflect on where these issues are and to make sure that we're taking note of them as we move forward. The most basic things that I kind of want to speak about, and these don't necessarily pertain to the craft field, but they're larger accessibility and equity issues, And I think the things that became most glaring are issues in response to tech. And so I'm going to kind of list those off quickly, and again, to put them in your mind, and as they might drive some conversations or questions that we have later on. But I certainly noticed in switching all of my classes to an online forum that whereas you might have a really respectful relationship with your students in the classroom where you acknowledge their name and their pronouns, that might not be happening behind the scenes. So in moving to, we use Microsoft at my university. So in moving to SharePoint or Teams, it might be then misgendering or misnaming your students. So this is an issue, again, that has happened in the past, has continued to happen, but how might we make sure that we're advocating for just how glaring of an issue this is as we move forward? I also want to speak to a moment again about that access to internet. So access to internet is such an issue right now as university students are moving to remote learning. But that's an issue for them every day. There certainly are these larger conversations that exist within academia about the fact that students should have, that all students at a university level, primary school, high school, et cetera, should have access to the internet because it's such an important and kind of crucial tool for them to be able to learn and thrive. So I've started to think and speak with my colleagues about, we have student fees, for instance, that go towards things like sports, athletics on campus, which I will not diss at all. I am both one of those strange people that's a craft artist and also a huge, massive sports fan. But why don't we have student fees that go towards things like broadband internet for all of our students? And even furthermore, what about hardware and software issues? So I've been fortunate to be able to get a lot of my students computers and access to things like Adobe Suite from home, but that should probably be within the arts and crafts disciplines, the baseline for all students moving forward. So this made this become a much more kind of glaring issue to me, but it's always existed, And to some degree, this is all a discussion about redefining what that base level is, basically, right? What are the most basic needs that an individual might have to be able to take advantage of their education, take advantage of the environment that we're creating for them. And in my mind, that very much at base level is going to be hardware, software, and access to the internet. I've also, just as kind of an aside, digital office hours. So this is something I'd never considered in the past, but now all of my office hours are digital. And as I do work at a commuter institution, this puts us in this position where oftentimes students might not have the ability to be on campus. They don't live on campus. They can't come in during my office hours. So I certainly, moving forward and away from this semester, will be allowing all of my students to schedule digital office hours as opposed to in-person office hours. I think just a norming of that will be a really fantastic kind of thing moving away. So that gets those larger kind of tech issues out of the way, the things that, again, aren't specific to the art or craft disciplines, but are things that have just become such glaring structural issues of equity and accessibility to me. And I hope that we're all mindful of how we can advocate for changes for them as we move forward. But now I want to speak a little bit more specifically to the issues that are regarding craft and art education. So again, I teach jewelry and metalsmithing at my university. I also teach foundations level courses, thesis coursework, et cetera. So I kind of work across the spectrum. But in studio art courses, and particularly in craft disciplines, we have we often have extremely specific technology, right? Extremely specific equipment that our students need to use in order to be able to successfully complete their degree in a rigorous way, right? And this is something that we always have acknowledged as being, somewhat of an issue, right? Students might not be able to come in during the open studio hours, et cetera. I think that our hand has been forced, many of us, our hand has been forced in this instance to not have the kind of more classic response of, well, you have to make time for it. You have to make time to come in, and to really rethink what that access might, or how we can provide alternate means of access to our students. And so I've certainly looked to the way that community colleges, for instance, I think they've been the kind of best advocates for this in the past, in the way that they're providing accessibility of materials and tools to their students. And I'm trying to see how I can potentially learn from those models that are already in place for students in a university to also have that level of access moving forward. And this, for instance, is also very much empowering me. Like, we have toolkits that we run out to our students, but how can we create more comprehensive toolkits ultimately so that they can get more out of their work at home and not be so dependent on the physical space.
Leslie, are you guys able to lend tools from your studio to your students? Because I know a lot of them don't have the money to buy things.
Yeah, so that became a little bit tricky because we were moved offline or moved off campus so quickly. So we went from thinking that, and I think this is probably the case for many people here, it just all shifted so quickly. We initially thought we could have open studio through spring break, and then it was the campus would close end of next week, and then suddenly it was on Tuesday by noon, you all have to be out of the campus.
Right.
So the ability to even lend things out became really difficult. And then also questions came to the equity of that lending. So who can get to campus, to get those materials? So if I email all my students, right, and I say, you can come in and borrow things from the school, everyone might not have that opportunity to take advantage of that. And I certainly can't make our coursework be dependent on that. So yeah, and I think that some schools, depending on where you're teaching, and depending on that length of time between the announcements and when the school closures actually were, may have had more opportunities to do that lending, but unfortunately we are kind of pushed out of the university without being able to do that.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
Makes it challenging for you to come up with new lessons around materiality, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, which definitely kind of brings me to the next point, which is project flexibility. And again, these are all things that we're addressing now, but for myself, and I'm encouraging you all to think about how we might approach our teaching moving forward with these kind of lessons that we've learned. So because I had a range of students from having like fully set up studios that are way nicer than mine at home to students who have nothing more than a bench pin and a saw frame that's been provided by the university, I had to very much adapt the projects that I was working with my students so that they would be, one, accessible, two, that they would cater to the individual kind of needs and that the students had. Certainly being mindful of the other stresses that they might have ahead of them, whether it's a larger work schedule. So many of my students are actually working more now than they had in the past because they might be dealing with family or home care, or just they're simply having more hours at their place of work. Many are working in stores, grocery stores, things like this. So how can I have flexibility in the projects, which is kind of required now, but how might I adapt that moving forward? So with an intermediate level class, for instance, I decided to give my students, 4 options, but they came down to only using 3 of those options that I put. And it certainly does put a lot more work on our plate as educators, but it has been a really, really meaningful response so far. So again, this is an intermediate level course, so approaching it with a kind of a build your own artist residency. So teaching them how to write a proposal for a residency, which could also be adapted for a grant proposal, and then independently work towards projects, being mindful of the materials and equipment that they have at home. Another is inspired by Renee Zettel-Sterling's Liminality series, which was a kind of a broach-a-day type project, but it's really an archival and mourning-based project. And many of us, I'd say all of us, are going through a sense of mourning to some degree right now. So that's been a really I've had a great response from my students for that. And then the other, for those who are more interested in going through this program because they want to make jewelry for a living, a design your own, kind of limited production jewelry collection. And so we're doing the design work for that. We're speaking about how you might move forward with creating that after you are able to get back on campus or back into a studio space, but it's really kind of this tailored specific information for that student. And so I'm considering how might I integrate these types of projects and this type of structure into my courses moving forward. It certainly is easier at an intermediate or advanced level class, but it's going to be more difficult at an introductory level class where we just have base level skill sets that we're learning, or that we're teaching rather. And that kind of brings me to my last point. I'm not sure where we're at time, Gwen. I know
You're fine.
All right.
You're good so far.
Which is hybrid models. And this is something that when brought up in faculty meetings for me in the past, I am like a staunch kind of anti-studio arts education and online platform. And so I'm not saying this is an endorsement necessarily, but something that I'm just thinking a lot about. if we're trying to create these more kind of equitable and accessible spaces for our students, and at that base level, they might just not have access to the campus or access to the materials or to the studio or to the time, ultimately, to time that aligns with the time that those classes are scheduled to run. Could we potentially have a hybrid model that's that we meet once a week on campus and once a week is a digital kind of face-to-face through Zoom, a video platform, or even on the phone? And this was actually inspired by the fact that there's a great possibility with a lot of universities that to encourage social distancing in the fall, we may have to toggle to hybrid coursework where we have less students on campus at any given time. So if there's a Monday, Wednesday class, half of those classes are only on campus on Monday, half of those classes are only open on Wednesday. And so again, that could help with the social distancing issue, but it also can provide much more accessibility to our courses as we move forward.
Yeah.
I think that the big things that have prevented us from thinking about these in the past, these potential changes, is kind of a few things, and that's how we define rigor. I think we need to be open to redefining rigor through a lens of access and equity. So we can still have rigorous instruction and a meaningful outcome from our students, but that can look different from how it's kind of ingrained in us to look. And is, kind of as an aside from that, is our current model punitive? So are we currently creating a model that just by the way that it is structured is going to leave people out of that conversation and from accessing your curriculum and the things that you're building, the things you want to share with all of your students? And so those are kind of, I know I was talking quick, I want to get through a lot there, but those are the things that I'm really thinking about right now, the ways I'm changing my teaching and the ways I really want to reflect on my teaching as I move forward.
Leslie, I feel like this time, and you and I have chatted a little bit before we had this call about the cracks and the inequity that exists in particularly higher education. And you have seen that because your students are a little bit unique and they're older and they're usually, don't live on campus. They, they travel to campus. How are you going to take those cracks and reincorporate them back into your teaching when you on the other side of this? Do you have some thoughts on that? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, I kind of try to wave that in a little bit. I think the biggest takeaways for me are certainly, well, how can I just advocate? I think that I believe that all educators advocate for their students, but how can I really tailor that advocacy to address some of these things that are a little bit more even just base level? So how can I really fight to get more funding, to get more comprehensive toolkits and material supplies for all of my students? How can I advocate for their access to, our communications design students all have a laptop that's kind of part of that program, but ultimately, especially working within an interdisciplinary studio arts program, every student should have access to a computer to work from home and from any of the necessary kind of design softwares to go along with it. So I'll certainly be kind of maybe changing the direction of where my advocacy lies on campus to really, push forward those things. And then I'm really excited how this will change the way that I teach upper division courses, ultimately. I think that sometimes we can think that we're flexible, and until we're really forced to be flexible, we don't realize how inflexible it is.
Yeah.
And so I've had such amazing conversations with all of my students in that class, in that intermediate class that I spoke to, that could only have been a response from this kind of adaptive and flexible mode of working with them. And I'm excited to see how I'll continue to implement that working forward.
That's great. We do have a few questions in the chat. One question though, by the way, for those of you who joined us late, this is Leslie Boyd. Unfortunately, Paul from Haystack had some internet connectivity problems, so we'll be bringing him back in when we're done with Leslie, for those of you who are a little confused about who's on the screen. But Leslie Boyd is the founding member of the JV Collective out of Philadelphia. She's also creator of Making Progress, which is a resource for social justice and craft, and she's the assistant professor of art at Metropolitan State University in Denver. So we're just having a higher education conversation about how Leslie has pivoted during the COVID-19. So one of the questions is, earlier you were describing that you gave your students 4 options and they only took care of 3. Somebody wants to know what the 4th option was.
So the 4th, am I unmuted? Yes. Okay. So the 4th option that I gave them was they it was the tell me what to do option. So again, students have such varying levels of kind of emotional, mental stress that's happening. We all do, right? And I noticed, because I'd sent out a poll to my students right as this was first happening to figure out what they had at home to work with, what their accessibility looked like for the internet, hardware, software, et cetera. And also what they were anticipating being the biggest challenges for them as they migrated to remote learning or to online teaching. And those responses were really just all over the board. And a lot of them were just like in kind of a panic mode, like this intense like panic mode. And so my fourth option was the you tell me what to do option. And so that was posed as like mini projects. So instead of having to like think rigorously and put, you know, have immersive research taking place, it was one of them, well, a lot of them were inspired actually by the Art 21 series, like I forget the name of those right now, but those kind of quick videos they have. Fantastic, and can be really adapted to any discipline. But one of the first ones, for instance, was inspired by, I think Sienna Patty has been posting images of jewelry with classic painting. So it was like, look at jewelry and classic imagery, make a cookie cutter out of that, and then bake yourself cookies. And the bonus round to that was make some royal icing and adhere the cookies to your body to create jewelry. So things that were just like fun, kind of quick exercises that they could just have a good time and continue to be immersed in the conversation with their peers.
That's great. Leslie, I know that you, when this first happened, SNAG, the Society of North American Goldsmiths, we created a quick in conversation event for educators. And right after that, you started a private Facebook group for metal and jewelry educators to share resources. So when you're done, if you could just put the link into the chat, because I think it'd be nice for anybody who is not aware of that. And even I think non-jewelry and metal teachers could probably also learn a lot from that exchange, which has been really beautiful to watch. My last question for you is that I know that you've also taken advantage of bringing in some visiting artists to work with your students to engage them even more. Can you talk a little bit about how you've approached that and how that has worked?
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's also one of the things I'm most excited about moving forward. Denver's pretty landlocked. And so when I lived out in Philadelphia and the Baltimore area, it was easy to get visiting artists in. It's a little bit more difficult here. And so I brought in Sarah Rachel Brown, who is the host and creator of Perceived Value podcast, which is an excellent podcast y'all should listen to about how you make a living as an artist ultimately. And she was able to come in and talk to my students last week, basically the same way we're having this discussion right now. She shared her screen with a PowerPoint artist presentation, talked to the students afterwards, and it was really fantastic. My students loved that, absolutely loved that. So I'm already, kind of scrambling to figure out who I'm going to bring in next week that will be a great kind of addition. And I'm just also like, how and why haven't I thought about this in the past? And maybe you all have, but how can I get international artists potentially to come in and have conversations with my class? And with many of these platforms, we can record those lectures. So even if it is an issue of a student not necessarily having access to a computer at that time to listen in, we can make sure that they can have an opportunity to view that later on.
That's great. That's wonderful. There's a question in the chat. Somebody wanted to know if you had additional ideas that you've been using to engage students online. I think I've heard this from a lot of teachers where it's sometimes challenging to engage the students in Zoom and online. And so someone would like some more suggestions and ideas from you, please.
Totally. We personally at my school, we use something called Microsoft Teams. And so I know every school has like a different platform, but part of Teams, and it's not my favorite thing, but there is like a chat actually. It's like almost works like a message board. And I've noticed that many of my students that might not speak up as much during class session will engage there and will pose questions in there, even share content that might be related or completely unrelated, quite frankly, to the class, things to, pictures of puppies and things like this. So that's been really helpful. I also email students individually with kind of follow-ups. So I might, email students to let them know what we did in any given week or any given class time. But I'll also, if I notice that someone was maybe a little bit more either distracted or not as engaged, to just have a personal follow-up with them. I think that's something that a studio artist in particular, and studio arts educators we can really benefit from the small class sizes, because certainly in an art history lecture or another, lecture-based academic class, you might not have the ability to individually email, 35 to 100 of your students.
Right.
But yeah.
That's great. That's wonderful. Couple comments in there. So in the chat, so you can check those out, Leslie. People are thanking you for your ideas and your thoughts. And a lot of people are really interested in that Facebook group. So feel free to post that in there when you can. And then just because I wear my SNAG hat on these conversations as well, Kristen, our education director, Shiga, was kind enough to actually let me know and remind everybody that SNAG is having in conversations for educators. The next one is this coming Monday, and she gave the login info and all of that. And even if you are not a SNAG member, or even if you're not a medical educator, you're welcome to join us. It's just a really great resource for educators to come together and share ideas, frustrations, come up with innovative solutions, that sort of thing. And Leslie, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Totally. And I'll throw my email there in as well. I love talking equity work in higher ed, and I love talking jewelry and craft. So if you want to have these conversations, just send me an email. I'm happy to
That's
help.
great. Wonderful. All right. I hear that Paul is back. So I'd like to bring Paul back in if he is still got connectivity. Oh, Paul, welcome back.
Yeah.
So you were talking about this wonderful focus group with board and staff so that the conversations, the decisions that you all were making about the future of Haystack was actually both a board and a staff decision as you moved forward. And that's kind of where we lost you.
Great. Well, I definitely am bringing the reality of where we live to the table. On an island off the coast of Maine, and internet connection can be challenging in the best of times. So that's what happened. So to go back to where I left off, we really thought about how do we lead through this time as an organization by thinking through questions based on our values and not simply through economic questions. And so when we realized that suspending programs through the end of May was going to need to go farther, we did what you do, which is that we asked, what are the scenarios we're facing? What are the questions ahead of us? How might they impact us? And what are our options? And we looked at opening mid-season. We looked at opening in the fall. There were too many unknowns ahead of us. We couldn't plan accurately, not knowing how travel bans and the virus would continue to spread or change. It takes 5 weeks just to open the campus to the public, and we needed a lead time. And we very quickly did what you often get to in the end, which is that we built out a worst case scenario budget. We took all revenue out of the budget from room, board, and tuition. We asked if we could survive, and what we really said, though, was that we didn't have a choice, and that we felt as an organization that it was socially irresponsible to encourage people to come to a remote community during or after a public health crisis. And that was the question that we kept coming back to over and over, is what is our social responsibility to this place, to this field, and really to the country? And, we're not going to be able to stop this single-handedly, but we can do what we can to make sure it doesn't spread. Maine is the oldest state in the country in terms of population. The county where Haystack is located in is one of the oldest counties in terms of the age of residents. Maine has 300 critical care beds in the entire state. We have no business bringing people here from hotspots or encouraging them to come for a 2-week workshop. And so what we decided in one foul swoop was that the biggest move we could make, the one that would feel most impactful and that we hoped would provide leadership on a broad level, was simply to say, we are going to take a pause and we'll be back next year. And we put out that messaging, and we very quickly were overwhelmed with feedback from folks who care about this place saying, thank you for making this decision. We spoke with other organizations who said that our decision to suspend programs helped them think about it differently. We learned how to think about this question from watching organizations like SNAG and NCECA cancel large programming, which on the front end of the pandemic seemed like, an impossible thing to do. Like, there's no way that NCECA is going to cancel a conference, and they had to. And so this was, the step we needed to take. After doing so, though, you're left with so many questions. And really one of the biggest questions for me as a director was, how do I protect the staff? How do we keep the people who make this place possible, who make the day-to-day operations what they are, who bring vision and care, and who have donated their lives to the school? How do we make sure that they can still keep doing that work? And how do we move an organization forward during a time of pause? And again, I go back to that idea that the difference between having to do something and choosing to do it, and we chose to do it. And as a result, Haystack will take $1 million hit on our endowment. We were in a very privileged position to make that choice. Other smaller organizations are not in that position. They're in perilous finances, and making that choice or having to make that choice could be the result in their survival or in their decline as an organization. We will come out of this time of this pandemic. I think there will be pre-COVID and post-COVID in how we think about fundraising, in how we think about reserve funds, in how we think about organizational planning. And I am eternally grateful that Haystack was in a position and had a board that believed that we needed to take some of the very precious funds out of our endowment that were unrestricted to get us through this period of time. It allowed us to keep our core staff of 15 people employed, and it will allow us to do things that we may never have the opportunity to do again at a time when we now are going to run a school with no students. And
what are those things? I know you have some plans for moving forward.
Well, we're building out all the plans now, but we're going to do everything from transition our donor database to a new system. We're going to upgrade and modernize a lot of the accounting systems that we use. We're going to do a complete program analysis of every program we run, every piece of paper that is generated for it and out of it. We're going to finish a strategic plan. We're going to begin undertaking a campus master plan. We're going to do major facility upgrades and the renovations as we can raise funds to do it. And you know, some of the questions that we've also had to ask is like, there's this knee-jerk reaction right now that says, if you can't run your program, then you should be running online education. Mm. And I'm really skeptical of it, because I think we also have to ask, what if online education doesn't make sense for your organization? Or what if you actually don't believe that what you teach can be translated into an online experience? Or what if you don't have the internal capacity to do it well? Or what if that ends up being all you do during this period of time? And I think we have to ask, what's the goal and what's the purpose and what would the outcome be? And is it really the best use of our time? Someone said to me, well, what's going to happen to all the people who wanted to take a class at Haystack? And I said, they'll be disappointed. And then they'll come back next year, I hope, if we do our job right. But we need to now ask, how do we engage with people during this time? How do we keep them interested in the school? And how do we also say, you know, we're thinking of things in a new way. We can't think of it the way we thought of it. And the truth is, for us, like looking to a university and how universities are handling online education and thinking we should translate that to a not-for-profit summer organization like ours is, I think, not non-transferable in many ways. And one of the things that we must remember is universities by far are not losing money during this period of time like smaller not-for-profits are. They're not refunding students' tuition, and they have an obligation to translate all of their education online to get their students through a degree program. Haystack has the choice, and we're not going to generate significant revenue, and we may not even do it that well. And so we're really trying to think moving ahead, if we do things online and distanced as a way to contribute to a national conversation or an international conversation or address questions, that's meaningful. But we're not going to look at translating a ceramics workshop online for us. That's not going to make sense and work for us in this way. And we're trying to ask some other questions. And so the joke about baking cookies at home was like, it was like the most ridiculous thing we could think of. It's like, well, people need something to do. What if we gave them all the recipes that we've ever used for cookies, right? Like, and we did that, and people loved it. You know, it was a meaningful way to say, you know, you can connect with us like this, and we want to share this with you. And so we're also trying to think, how do you lead by generosity and give people things for free? And how do you provide them with things that they can feel a connection to you, so that hopefully you're further developing those relationships. The whole way that we develop relationships with our funders, with donors, with granting agencies had to turn on a dime. And we have a lot of revenue that we have to recoup right now in order to be a healthy organization. And having an endowment doesn't mean your problems are solved, right? But now it means all the questions I thought we should be asking about long-term planning, there's a whole new host of questions that are folded into that now. And my biggest hope, and I'll talk about it in front of anybody I can get my hands on, including my 14-year-old daughter, who is like, you know, up and coming not-for-profit finance, likes to talk about it, is, you know, the magic phrase is unrestricted operational support. Every granting agency wants to give you a project grant, and they're really exciting because they're connected to something that they identify with. We need to also help people understand that we need reserve funds for times like this to get us through. So the last thing I'll say is that when we realized this was the case, suddenly something came up where there were needs in our community for personal protective equipment, like, you know, we're hearing all over the country, which is shameful to say the least. And a neighbor in a neighboring town was trying to make some on her own, and it was really slow, and she needed some help with a laser cutter to cut plastic to make a face shield. And so we were able to help her with that. And all of a sudden we realized we had the capability to produce equipment like this. And James Rudder, who runs our Fab Lab, has taken this on. It's like a one-man charge that he's now folding other staff into and members of the community. And over the past 2 weeks, we've made 500 of these face shields, and we're donating them to area hospitals, to senior citizen homes, to ambulance corps. And we're now actually allocating staff time to start putting out a public access poll where people can order them. The Maine Community Foundation allowed us to reallocate a grant to help fund this. And we've committed that everything we make will be given away for free. And so we're doing what we can in that regard as well. And that for now is one of the main ways that we're trying to connect and to get back to the original question, to take care of people.
Yeah. And I think what's amazing is the way, Paul, you as the leader of Haystack and the Haystack staff and board have approached this. You took care of yourselves, you took care of Haystack, you took care of the potential visitors and students to Haystack, and then you also thought about taking care of your own community, your local community. And I think that that holistic approach is a really thoughtful approach and really interesting. And then on top of all of that, I hear on Instagram is where all the cookie recipes are. So you're taking care of people's stomachs. So, you know, I think that that's pretty amazing that you kind of have this great approach around that. And I think that, you know, Haystack was one of the first craft schools to announce the cancellation for the season. And I think that that was just a wonderful model, and the way that you communicated that and the thoughtfulness around that, I think really shows the true leadership that Haystack, you know, really reflects in the field. So thank you for sharing your story with us today. Thanks for coming back after losing some Wi-Fi access. And we'll have you back at the end to answer some questions. There's a lot of comments. People are saying, go Haystack, Haystack's awesome. And just to confirm that that's where the cookie recipes are, is on your Instagram account. Is that correct, Paul?
Yep, they are. I think we might end up transitioning some of them online to the website, but for now they're there. And when we eventually are able to be back in our office, we actually have several hundred copies of the book, which are these little, very simple, inexpensive books. But you can get the entire book for free on Instagram.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate everything that you've done and the thoughtfulness that you've approached this whole process with, because it is an unprecedented time that we've never been through. And I think one of the things that really stuck with me is the fact that as you're doing all of these kind of infrastructure improvements and spending the time this year and the strategic planning, you're already also thinking about planning for another potential pandemic, which is something that I think all of us need to be always thinking about. We can't think of this as an isolated situation. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective on all of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Gwen.
Okay, we're going to move on to our last presentation for the afternoon, which I don't know where time goes. It just kind of flies by. But I would like to bring in both Annette Cowenberg, who's the 2020 recipient award and a faculty in fiber arts at Maryland Institute of College of Art, as well as one of her students, Hadassah Dawana, from who also is from MICA.
Hi. Hi. So good to see everybody, and thank you. And I definitely want to thank Leslie for bringing up the equity and all the issues we're working with. Before I start the conversation with Hadassah, and I'm so proud and so amazed that we're both in this moment where we can share some thoughts. But I want to share first a few thoughts myself about the future of where we are as an educator. I'm a craftsperson too, but as an educator too. And I'm thinking a lot about where are we and where will we go? And it has become a considerable issue faced by all, and especially by our students like Hadassah, who's going to graduate in really soon. And not only that, but I think what we need to start thinking about is that for me, from my point of view right now, the world seems to be coming apart at the seams, and we have to reposition ourselves, all of us. And starting mending as a textile artist came to mind, the word mending, and mending became for me at this period of time, besides first grieving, mending came for me really an important word to start thinking about what we are doing and how we're moving forward. But I think too, what we need to do is appreciate our limits and the fragile parts in the world, like the natural, the social, and the technological, the technological world. So for us to change our modes of thinking and the necessary transformation, thinking about a new economy for our students, a just society for our students, for all of us, to heal the deep social fractures that we already see and that will only be larger after this pandemic is over. We need to activate a community, I think. And in activating a community means for me, a creative changes. So I think what we need to start thinking in education more about is to change delivery models. And if that is hybrid, blended learning, or if that is only online learning for right now. But I think what we need to do is mending our past mistakes. We need to be more inclusive. We need to build more equity. We need to build in more social innovation. We need to connect. We need to connect to local communities and outside entities, and even open up our academic institutions to all. We have the knowledge, we have the equipment, and what do we do with that? So the important part for me is started thinking about how we can activate not only our new graduates as creative change makers, but do that locally and globally. And repositioning ourselves for me means thinking deeply about the term mending. Mending for me means patiently restitching, repairing our relational fabric, mending what is broken. Mending means adaptation, and adaptation means changing what is there. You can't change what is there if you don't listen. So we need to do some deep listening. And here's where craft comes in, and here's where our students come in, like Hadassah. What is important for them? What is challenging right now? How do you feel about conversing materials and react to that within a digital space? How do you use your amazing way of adapting tools and create new materials all the time in the studio, but how do we do that now in another type of community? I think we can't do this alone, and I want to emphasize that. And I feel very strongly that with technology moving forward and engineers and scientists coming up with new things, new apps, new ways of new platforms, new ways of engaging us into the digital space, that we as artists, designers, and craftspeople need to sit at the table and understand each other's language, and building stronger alliances and networks across disciplines and build diverse communities and exchange information. And I think that our new generation, like Hadassah in front of you, have a lot of challenges. And I would like to ask her a question first about that. Right now, we as in Micah have started bringing everything online too. What she's missing, what her challenges are, and how she resolved as a newly minted senior coming out soon.
Yeah, so definitely for me, some challenges were that, you know, with the nature of me being very much into textiles and liking to weave and really like to use like the digital textile printer, all of these are very facility reliant resources. And even if I come back home, I can't really necessarily have access to that unless I have access to other like tools I could use to make those things. Or like it just showed to me that I think there should be more partnerships between institutions and other companies that offer equipment, because as a student, you know, when you want to like order anything, let's say yardage for digital textile printing, it's very expensive to get sample sizes, and it's only when you go into bulk sizes that these amounts are more reasonable. So what does it mean if like an institution can come together and work with these companies so that we can get access to these tools and resources for a lower price or get like an institutional discount? That would be really great for people like me. As well as I know that with Micah, we've been thinking about having like digital exhibitions, because obviously as seniors, one thing that we're really looking forward to is showcasing our work at the end of the year. And it would be a great way to make connections and for people to really know about our work. So now we're looking into using Instagram, something that's very visual and really gets a lot of people's attention, to use that to showcase our work. And personally for me, I've also been thinking about, like with my work, what are some things I could do with like what I have access to now? And so basically, I've been thinking that, because me personally, like I wanted to, let's say, make these woven bags, but if I don't have a loom, like a floor loom anymore, what could I do? So I started thinking about, well, I could weave with chenille and it could be a thicker material. And then I no longer have to sew the edges if I can just do like a basic whip stitch, and that can be a way that it could still function as a bag for me, which is important, but also be structurally sound. So these are just some things that I was thinking about. I know some other students are also looking into doing like natural dyeing, just trying to use whatever resources they may have in their fridge, for instance, or the grocery store. So really, we've been thinking that way.
So Hadassah, what kind of resources and support would you need when you're out of Micah as a newly stepping into the world, starting a business with your textiles? What are your needs? What do you need? I talked about in my introduction a little bit about community, that makerspaces, for instance, can be very important here, that academic institutions can even become more of makerspaces where you can come back into, so that the investment is not as large. You're not working in isolation, that you get knowledge, that it will be exchanged. What would your dream be? What would that look like?
Basically, my dream would be that we're able to come back in the future and use the facilities, because like I said, some things just aren't the same. So it'd be nice if we're able to like come back and have some time in which we can actually make the work that we want to make. As well as like, I know before, me personally, I was considering that I could do, let's say, digital mock-ups and use like Photoshop or, you know, Cinema 4D for prototyping. And I realized that like, I personally, like I moved back and forth between like the digital realm as well as like the tactile. And I felt like me transitioning to everything like digitally was just like, it didn't feel satisfying unless I'm able to go back into both worlds and also do something like physically with my hands. So then I was thinking, okay, how do I like go about, you know, solving this? And back to like what you were asking me, and like in a sense of like community and all that, it would really be by like institutions working together to find ideas, like not just like within Micah, for instance, but if Micah could partner with like other universities or other universities programs and their majors and departments, let's say within the United States, you got together and shared about, where people can buy tools or materials. Because something I've also realized by participating in Micah's Upstart program is that, when we come to, school, we're taught how to make and taught how to think, but in a way, we're not taught about the business side of things as much. And by me being in this entrepreneurship program that Micah has called Upstart, I was able to start learning these things. And this let me see that, in terms of like material suppliers and such, I feel the institution could do a bit of a better job of like sharing that information with us, because ultimately when you graduate, you're not going to have access to those tools anymore. So in a way, with this like pandemic, with COVID-19, it kind of put us seniors to think about, well, the future, because that's how things would be for us. We can't come back to campus and all of that. So I think this just showed how there really could be partnerships and sharing of information, even from like a larger scale, and how that could benefit the whole community.
Do you feel that has to happen always in person, or is there a possibility that can help online, that there are more possibilities for you when you're out in the textile industry, or when you start your own business, that there is a real, that there is a community where it gets shared not only with craftspeople, but with people in other fields even? How would you feel about that?
Like I feel like that, sorry, can you rephrase your question and ask it again?
I mean, is there ways, so you said, I mean, a school can't deliver always everything, right? We deliver a certain amount. The Maryland Institute College of Art, and I can only speak for that, but we are fine arts oriented with an entrepreneurial slant. And how do we fill in that other part, especially when you're out, the entrepreneurial part? Would it be an important way of starting to move forward, starting communities that are more interdisciplinary in that sense, so that you can be part of a community that helps each other?
Yeah, like I think I'm definitely for that. Like I feel that everyone could really benefit from working interdisciplinary, because like I realize, like, in all honesty, that's how the real world works. Like we don't only just make our own independent work, like we work together with groups of people. And I mean, in terms of how that would look like right now, even I myself am not sure. But I know, for instance, there's even like other, let's say, fashion brands right now, and they're having these like blog posts about which people can come together and talk about their state of their mental health, or how to keep like a positive mindset. And I feel like that's really important during these times, because even I myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm stressed, have to do XYZ, I'm a senior, graduating, all of this. But, in a way, if we're able to just like also come together, and kind of like what we're doing now, just being able to come together and talk about our experiences and our common struggles, that in and of itself is like a really great achievement, because it's only by having discussions and really hearing people out that we can move forward to finding solutions.
Can I ask a personal question? What are you missing, Hadassah, from the
What am
classroom?
I missing? I'm missing having access to the facilities.
Mostly.
Yeah, I just really wish I could use that equipment and stuff, but right now I can't really. So I'm still trying to navigate that in a way.
That's great. Thank you both for having kind of a one-on-one with each other, teacher versus student. And I really appreciate a lot of the questions. And Hadassah, we really appreciate your perspective as a student. I have a couple questions that are in the chat. And somebody wanted to know if we could create some access to materials or equipment ever be an extension of another public service, such as a public library or anything like that. Annette, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do, and that's the reason why I started with the introduction. I feel that's, and I can only speak, of course, from my own experience, but that's, we have been isolated, and I teach a class that is very much connected with open work, so there's a makerspace. I work with engineers in the class, I work with the community, I bring in volunteers from the community, and we use actually technology companies in Baltimore and in Washington to help our students. I think we can't isolate ourselves anymore. We need to do this together. we need to become more of a place where we have a certain intelligence as craftspeople, where we have a real understanding about materiality. How can we share that with the community so sustainability can become more of something we look at, that we can work with material scientists to share our experience. So I think we're too isolated as medium, and I think we need to break that open. And I'm actually not that this was on my list of hopes and dreams, but I think this is a good time to really start thinking about modeling new ways of thinking, new ways of sharing information, and new ways of opening up our institutions, that it's more coming in back and forth with hackerspaces, with makerspaces. We do already have a grassroots movement that we can look at, where education, entrepreneurship, and coming together and making comes together. So we should start building on that. That is what we already know. We can look at that, and that intersection of entrepreneurship, the making, and education should be a lot more fluid.
Oh, that's great. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you both very much. You both can stay on camera, and I'd like to bring back both Paul and Leslie as well. You know, this is a high volume call. We have over 300 people on this call, so I'm not able to get to every question. So I apologize if we didn't get to your question. A couple quick things. Paul was kind enough to post in the chat. There is an FAQ for some of you who had questions about, did they pay teachers? Did they refund deposits to students that had already signed up at Haystack? And so you can find those questions, those answers to those questions at the link that Paul kindly posted in the chat. So thank you very much. Jacqueline wants to know, Hadassah, as a student and textile designer, do you feel that using the online digital presentation allows you to feel that your work is well represented and can engage with those looking at your art online and eventually a consumer potentially of your work?
Yeah, definitely. And I feel that with what happened, it just makes you think about that a bit earlier. Because ultimately, it's not always in person that people can come and see your work. It's like, how do we make it so it's more accessible to people in different spaces? So definitely, like me, like having a website and like my Instagram presence as well, just to help to get my work out there. And then with the other people who have similar interests, you know, you follow and you build up that community and you comment on each other's posts. Like, that's definitely one way that's happening.
That's great. Okay, before we end this, I'd like to see if any of you have one last thought or piece of advice to people on the phone, or something that you hope that comes out on the other side of this pandemic. Paul, you want to go first?
Wow.
I know, pressure. Eat lots of cookies.
I think my hope of what comes out, at least in one very small way, is starting to happen, which is that people are talking to each other in a new way. And it's a real privilege to get to hear how people are struggling with really difficult questions and difficult decisions, and to remember that we're not operating in an economy of scarcity, that we can operate in an economy of abundance and generosity. And I think, like, the days of feeling like I can't tell you about a funder, or I can't share with you the way we did this, it's over. It's over and gone. And hopefully it was over and gone a while ago, but now it's really gone. And, you know, I feel like people should be transparent right now as much as possible, so that we can build something stronger that will last longer and that has less to do with us and more to do with a much bigger picture. Because I hope that all the work we're doing right now is about something that will outlive us all. And so that's one of the things that I hope.
That's great. Leslie, how about you? Do you have any thoughts or last minute
Yeah,
pieces of advice?
I think that we might think that things work really well, and they might work really well, but that should not make us complacent. The fact that just because they work well for us, or we have a generally great kind of response from our students or from the program, that's really serving everyone in the best way that it can. So I just hope that we might, always be reflective, us educators that are in on this call, we might always be reflective of how we can be, provide more equity to the course, content that we're putting forward, and how we can, open up more opportunities for people ultimately.
Great, thank you. And Annette?
Yeah, I would love to. I'm part of the Baltimore Design School that is in public middle high school. And 98% of our students are living under lower than the poverty level. So we have gone through a lot of processes to find ways of, and especially talking about equity. And I think we have, as a community, really built a structure from the Geek Squad of volunteers to getting them Wi-Fi, trying to find companies that will give them laptops. So now there is a system in place that certain things work, certain things don't work at all. But I think we all have learned a certain way of working. And especially I give that example because it was glaring what the problems were from, feeding kids who we are feeding in the morning and in the afternoon. So I think we have now an infrastructure, and we really need to grab that and say, how did we do that? What happened? And how can we apply that to all kind of different organizations?
Wonderful, thank you. And Hadassah, how about you? Do you have any last thoughts or hopes for the other side of this pandemic?
I guess just setting aside time to be really grateful for whatever we have in our life that makes us happy now. I mean, that's ultimately what I'm doing. And I'm very grateful that you guys gave me this opportunity to share my ideas, as well as to, hear from you guys, solutions that you're proposing.
Wonderful.
So
thank you all so much. A lot of people have been posting, offering services and resources in the chat that they have available for students, for teachers, for anybody, artists who are going through this pandemic. If you haven't posted a resource and you do have them, feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat so that we will make available both the recording of this presentation, as well as we will clean up the chat and make that available as well on ACC's Craft Forum website. So that will be available to you. And last but not certainly least, unfortunately, I have to scoot for a meeting, but I want to bring back into the screen Scott Pollock, the Senior Director of Programs and Public Engagement for the American Craft Council. He's going to offer a few wrap-up thoughts, and then please don't leave the meeting yet, because we will be ending this meeting with a wonderful celebration of music. So Scott, thank you so much for hosting all of us. I think all the speakers, thank you so much for everything that you offered. Such a nice wide variety of perspectives around education today. And I think that we'll be able to connect more people to other resources that exist out there and help them and support them as well. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Gwen. Here's the big round of applause. I try to get everybody at least that can clap for Gwen. Thank you, Glenn, so much for your help and your contribution over the past 3 weeks for stepping up. This is lovely. It's really powerful. Again, really choice words, everybody. Thank you for the speakers of choosing to be here, right? I think that this is a choice that we have. We feel oftentimes forced, and we're not doing this out of a sense of urgency, but there's clearly a strong message to do more and do more differently. Which is really, really important for us right now. As a national nonprofit just dedicated to bringing diverse craft communities together to really look at craft's impact in contemporary American life, we are really, really just thrilled to see people stepping up in different ways. And we want to sort of continue to find space in our lives, whether we have to still connect online or as we start to sort of reemerge and refocus and do things differently. That's really important. So I want to thank everybody for all your time and all your contributions and support. It's been lovely again to be able to do this on a late Friday afternoon. I know there are still yet probably 1 or 2 more Zoom meetings you might have to fit into your day today. You're amazing, you're courageous, hang in there. So with that, we were really fortunate in our last session to work with the Americans for the Arts, who have been doing so much for all of the creative industries, including the music industry, and helping people find space and how to connect. And Ruby, who was in our call last week, connected us with an amazing performer who's got a lot of, I think, a lot of similar themes that that her and her colleagues are experiencing too right now. That she's really been able to step up and bring to light and shed some light through her artistic musical practice. So Emma, if we could bring you into this call, I'm really excited to be connected to, connect all of us to Emma. If you're able to join us here and provide a little musical score for us as we walk our way out of this. And if you're all home with your virtual happy hour beverage of choice and your handmade cups, I just say raise a glass, hang in there, and let's continue on. So Emma, are you with us?
Yes, yes, I am. Hello, everybody. Really, really wonderful to be part of this meeting randomly today. Thank you so much for you guys all to involve me in this. Yes, my quote of the week has been very much nothing should go back to normal. Although I'm totally aware that like everything's on fire, and so we need to learn how to navigate that fire and kind of the craziness. So on that note, we were discussing last night what some fun songs would be for the end of your celebration today. So I'm going to start off with a cheesy number because I like cheese. If you want to sing along at home, feel free to do so. If you want to, dance around your living room, that's totally encouraged as well. And then I'll be finishing off with an original song that I wrote that I released about a week and a half ago, which happens to coincide ridiculously so with the current environment that we're in. So I hope you guys enjoy this. I want to hold him like that, doing Texas things. Hold him like Jimmy Ray said, baby, stay with me. Love, give me permission, baby, talk to space, to start. And after he's been hooked up with the one that's on his heart. Oh, 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 oh. I'll get him harder, show him what I got. And oh, 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 oh. I'll get him harder, show him. Carry mine, no, keep on breathing mine. She's got me like nobody. Carry mine, no, keep on breathing mine. She's got me like nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. And I wanna roll with him on the table, that little gambling is fun with you and me. Love intuition, mommy, you're a song, and baby, I love this night. Rough isn't fun, but oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 I'll get him hard to show him what I got. Oh, 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 I'll get him hard to show him. Carry on, no, he can read mine. I'll be fine. She's got me like nobody. Carry on, no, he can read mine. I'll be fine. She's got me like nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face. Now I will tell you that I love you. Just to hug you, cause I'm up with my muffin. And I'm a liar. Just sing with my love, go down and it's like a chick in the casino. Take the bait for a hang around. Promise this. I'm marvelous. Carry mine, no, he can't breathe mine. Oh, fine. She's got me like nobody. Carry mine, no, he can't breathe mine. Oh, fine. She's got me like nobody. Poker face, poker face. She's got me like nobody. Right, so that was my cheesy sign off number by Lady Gaga, a song she wrote for Good Face. This next song is an original song that I released, like I said, about 2 weeks ago. It is a song that, I don't know, resonates with me personally because I feel like when cards are stacked against you, sometimes all you need to do is dig deep in yourself and remind yourself that it's going to be okay, and that being brave is the only thing we can do. But of course, you know, together we rise. So I hope you enjoy this. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. And my name is FG. Only I want you, dream a little bigger. Open your eyes, won't you? See a little bigger. Because I was held you so tight, can't feel it now. Open your mind, won't you? Dream a little bigger. Oh, it knows, won't you? Feel your fire. Give it all, won't you? Hold your head higher. Because I held you so long. Happy to go. Open your mind, won't you? Dream a little bigger. Even the strongest sometimes fall. It's okay, yeah, we're all. Even the strongest have their days. Just be brave. Even the strongest sometimes fall. It's okay, yeah, we're all. Even the strongest have their days. Just be brave. Look inside, won't you? Feel the energy. Give it all, won't you? Believe you have it. The chase that held you so long. Happy to go. Open your mind, won't you? Dream a little bigger. Even the strongest sometimes fall. It's okay, yeah, we're all. Even the strongest have their days. Just be brave. Even the strongest sometimes. Oh, it's okay, yeah, we're all. Even the strongest have their days. Just be brave. Everyone knows that my time can never lose. With everything peace, live by God, that's right in you. Even the strongest sometimes, oh, it's okay, yeah, we're all. Even the strongest have their days. Even the strongest sometimes, oh, it's okay, yeah, we're all. Even the strongest have their days. Just be brave. Even the sometimes, oh, it's okay if we both, even the strongest happy days, just be brave. Just be brave. Just be brave.
Yeah, thank you. Clap, clap, clap as they all come in. Thanks, everybody. Have the best Friday. Thanks, Emma. We'll be in touch. And thank you all presenters again for just one last quick shout out. Yeah, hang in there, everybody. And we're going to definitely stay in touch.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much.